Comments on those? No, I see none. Very well, then we adopt the minutes of those. And the first item on this afternoon's agenda is oral questions to the Commission and Council on smart borders. I now give the floor for 5 minutes to the rapporteur, Mr. Moraes. Go ahead.
Thank you, President. I'm not in my usual seat because I had a small injury, so I'm not even in the proper political part of the chamber, but I have some crutches. So just to explain to everyone where I'm sitting, standing. However, let's get on to the very important issue of smart borders. So, colleagues, on behalf of the Libe Committee, allow me to present the oral question which we've tabled to the Council and to the Commission. And it's good to see again Commissioner Avramopoulos and, of course, our Presidency, which we know has been working incredibly hard over the past few days. The Smart Borders package is one which we debated on a number of occasions in the past and also in this chamber. The reason for this is very simple, colleagues. The original proposal that the Commission presented in 2013 had so many technical problems that in the committee we did not even proceed to the stage of preparing draft reports. Since then, we're in a discussion process with the other institutions and in a process of verifying what technical options we have. It is this process that we are continuing today. We have presented a series of questions to the Council and Commission, and we're looking forward to their responses. Specifically from the Commission, we would like to receive an update regarding the new proposals. Specifically, does the Commissioner intend to present a single legislative proposal which would be complemented by a modification of the Schengen Borders Code to take account of the systems at the border, or would it present two separate proposals which would also be complemented by a modification of the Schengen Border Code? Also, when does it intend to present the announced revised proposals? And could the Commission outline its main ideas for the revised proposals and its intended purpose? The following questions are also addressed to both the Council and to the Commission. We are interested to know whether they consider an envisaged entry-exit system and registered traveller programme to be appropriate and adequate responses to the current and future situation at the EU's external border, given the constant increase in the number of border crossings, and if so, why? Do they consider the envisaged entry and exit system to be an appropriate instrument for reducing the number of so-called overstayers, and if so, why? What are the views of the Council and Commission as regards access for the law enforcement purposes? What are the views as to their intended purposes? And what are their thoughts on the systems as regards the architecture, biometric identifiers and data retention periods? And to what extent may the European Court of Justice's ruling on data retention impact on the proposals as they stand? What are their views regarding upgrading the existing tools to achieve the intended objectives of the entry and exit system and the registered traveller programme regarding the interoperability and compatibility of various IT systems that already exist with regard to the Smart Borders package? And finally, for the Council specifically, what is the Council's view on the cost of the Smart Borders package, in particular those that are not fully covered by the Internal Security Fund? Colleagues, this Smart Borders package, which will take us into the next presidency, where there is a lot of interest in this matter, and I saw briefly the Minister, is one which has many deep civil liberties implications, but as you have heard from my questions, and we have one of our rapporteurs here, Ms Fajon, has many technical aspects. We in the Libe Committee want to get these technical aspects discussed openly and transparently, but also we have many civil liberties aspects. So I look forward to the debate today, and I'm very pleased that the members here present will give their best to ensure that the Smart Borders package begins to make sense to all of us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moraes. Now, on behalf of all the members of this House, I wish that you get well soon, and not to worry, we will not forget which political group you belong to, even though you're sitting up there at the back. Now, Mr. Schmit, on behalf of the Council, go ahead, sir, you have the floor.
les députés. Tout d'abord, permettez-moi.
So, first of all, let me thank Mr. Moraes and the two representatives, de MERA and Madame FAJON, for this question, but above all for the effort that they've undertaken to ensure the active participation of the European Parliament in this very important European project. In the Stockholm Project 2009, the European Council said to the Commission that you had to put forward proposals concerning a system for entry and exit, which was linked to a system for registering travellers with a rapid procedure, and to ensure that such a system would be operational as quickly as possible. This request became urgent in the current context, which I don't need to remind people in this room. And in fact, the Council on the 15th of October did call, and here I quote again, to bring up to date the technical solutions to reinforce the security of the external borders of the European Union with the aim of reaching the objectives which have been set both in terms of migration and in terms of security without damaging the free movement of people. Now, the creation of a European system of entries and exits is a necessary step to preserve the Schengen space. Currently, there are 12 countries who use entry-exit systems on a national basis where the added value is, at the least, limited. If no system is set up at the union level, the member states will continue to work on their own activity without a harmonized approach which the Intelligent Borders Packet is able to give us. Such a system ought to lead to a degree of harmonization and standardization of the checks at the border and lead to a higher level of security. This system will bring more certainty in order to calculate the amount of the authorized residence periods. If you look at the checking of travel documents and the amount of time that people are allowed to enter the Union for. If the system works properly, well, then the border guards will have more time to identify travellers that may present a security or a migratory risk. Over and above this, the fact that stamping will no longer be necessary will allow people to use automatic border doors for a number of the travellers for whom then the passage at the frontiers will be more fluid. This system will facilitate the identification of people at the borders and also inside the Union territory, and this would not have been the case by simply an updating of SES2. What the Commission put forward a year ago has also shown that it wouldn't be realistic to get to these objectives simply to work around the visa system, which is currently being deployed and which only applies to third country nationals who do not need a visa. This would have had a dissuasive effect for people coming from third countries who would have the intention of overstaying the allotted time given to them. Detailed information on the nationality of the overstayers will allow us to foresee more appropriate measures in order to deal with this phenomenon. This is also relevant when we come to the negotiation of the facilitation of visa agreements, because when we think about the giving out of exemptions of visas for third countries, when we look at the application of the mechanism of suspension for visa exemptions. The frequent traveller programmes, well, this is something that the Council has always been in favour of. At this moment in time, the discussion amongst the majority of the Member States is in favour of such a programme with flexibility in terms of the methodology with which it would be applied in terms of the nature of the border under consideration. The idea of asking for a facilitated RTP process and facilitated procedures. When we look at the possibility of some of the repressive options in terms of entry and exit, well, the very large majority of the member states have said that they are in favour of such a possibility, and this from the very beginning of the system being set up. The aim of this access would be the prevention or the detection of possible terrorist crimes or other crimes, or investigations in the area. Additionally, this was also the wish of a great member of the national parliaments during the meeting which was set up by the Libe committee earlier this year. So the access of the repressive services to this European system, in fact, is foreseen at a secondary level in terms of Eurovis and Eurodac. This access has got to also be submitted to very strict conditions. And for this reason, the Council is trying to identify the necessary elements for the future measures that will be required and ensure that they are going to be in conformity with the jurisprudence of the European Court of Justice. When it comes to the architecture, on the basis of this technical study which came before the pilot study, the majority of the Member States were in favour of setting up a system for registering travels and an entry-exit system as a single system. The majority in the Council prefers at this moment to have a progressive approach in order to integrate the entry-exit systems and the RTP system with the appropriate parallel systems. The national systems and the introduction of the possibility of reusing the currently existing systems in the VES system will in fact lead to the reduction of the final cost of the project. In terms of the kind and the nature of biometric identifiers which are being used, well, we're waiting for the results of the pilot study, which will be decisive for the future discussions. When it comes to the data retention periods, a great majority of the Member States are in favour of a uniform period of 5 years in order to harmonise all the systems and for all of the objectives that have been set. This will be in the interest not only of the authorities but also of the travellers, because this will allow us to reduce the number of cases where the data would have to be registered. The Council is fully aware of the importance of the judgment of the 8th of April 2014, which cancels the directive on the retention of data. All members of the Council are keen on setting up a system. We can actually take that into account, only do what is needed, have a proportional approach in order to achieve the objectives that we set ourselves. When it comes to the potential cost of the Smart Borders package, well, the Council shares the worries of the European Parliament of not to go beyond the budget which is strictly necessary in order to ensure the system works efficiently. The Council thinks that the package is absolutely essential for the Schengen space, Schengen area, and in fact I want to congratulate the Commission, because yesterday the Vice President of the Commission announced in the work programme for 2016 that there would be 3 regulations that would cover this area. And of course we are all looking forward to cooperation with the European Parliament to bring this very important project to a successful conclusion.
Thank you, Mr. Schmit. I now give the floor to the Commissioner Avramopoulos on behalf of the Commission.
Let me start by wishing the Chairman of the LIBE Committee a quick recovery. I wanted you to know, Claude, that we need you fully operational for the months to come. We have a lot of work to do together. Honourable members of the Parliament, thank you for this further opportunity to reflect with you on smart borders. I know how sensitive is the Parliament on this issue. As announced in both the agenda on security and the agenda on migration, and as already mentioned at our previous exchange on the 9th of June, it is our intention to present by the beginning of the next year a modified proposal of smart borders. In our upcoming 2016 proposal, we aim to present a solution that is operational and cost-effective. We will propose a system that performs well and fast, that meets the European Union's security and migration policy objectives, improves travellers' experiences, does not increase the workload for border guards, and stands the test of our data protection legislation. The Commission will modify the existing proposals of the Smart Borders package to deliver one single legislative proposal, complemented by a targeted modification of the Schengen's border code. It will be supported by a new impact assessment to incorporate and justify the changes to the original proposals. These changes will be limited to the following issues assessed: the architecture of the system, the biometric identifier to be used, the facilitations of border crossings, the retention time for the storage of data, and the access of law enforcement purposes. The current border control system is neither efficient nor effective in view of increased travel flows and Member States' financial constraints. The Smart Borders proposal will, when implemented of course, lead to a reduction of the repetitive manual tasks of the border guards and release the resources where they are urgently needed. They will also facilitate the crossing by third country nationals of EU external borders through a semi-automated or fully automated system. The modified Smart Borders proposal will allow for a more effective EU policy against irregular migration and notably the phenomenon of overstayers. It will help border guards detecting travellers that did not respect the terms of their stay in the Schengen zone and will allow them undertaking appropriate action. This is also expected to have a preventive effect on overstaying. Data generated in the entry-exit could also be of use to law enforcement authorities in the fight against terrorist offences and other serious criminal offences in specific cases. Should access of law enforcement purposes be granted, the necessary substantive and procedural safeguards will obviously be introduced. Subject to the results of the new impact assessment, some preliminary conclusions can be already presented. As I said at previous occasions, it seems preferable to build one single system with functionalities for both entry-exit system and registered traveller programmes instead of two different systems. This decreases the development and operation costs, avoids the duplication of travellers' personal data and reduces the impact on national systems. As for the possible synergies with existing systems, the reuse of certain elements from the visa information system, such as the common biometric matching system, seem to be the preferred option. Such approach presents a lower risk level and will be cheaper than the option of a full and immediate integration to the VIAS. The possibility of a limited interoperability between the entry-exit system and the visa information system is under assessment, and it would prevent the registration of the same data concerning the same persons in two different systems. The 2013 proposals proposed the use of 10 fingerprints at biometric identifier. However, the technical study showed that the verification of the identity of a traveller, a facial image is sufficient, while for the identification of a traveller, a combination of fingerprints and facial image gives the best results. The ongoing testing phase will need to confirm how these options work out in practice. However, it is clear to me that the biometric identifier used for the entry-exit system has to be as light and non-intrusive as possible. A major challenge for us is to ensure that the introduction of a smart border system will accelerate the border control process. To complement the functionalities for registered travellers programme, a wider possibility for using process accelerators such as self-service kiosks or mobile devices applications could be promoted. This would facilitate border crossing for a wider group of travellers. The impact assessment will look into the details of this very important question. On the subject of data retention, it is clear that if records of previous stay are deleted too quickly, travellers would have to re-enroll more often. It would also mean that border guards can only see a very short period of the traveller's history. Just remember that in today's situation with stamped passports, border guards can reconstruct up several years of travel history when looking at the passport of the person that stands in front of them. In this context, I want to underline once again that the Court of Justice ruling on the Data Retention Directive has no direct effect on other EU legal instruments. However, it is very clear that a strict assessment of the proportionality and necessity of measures that constitute serious restrictions to fundamental rights is needed. These key points raised in the Court of Justice judgment will be fully addressed in the Smart Borders proposal. Thank you very much for your attention.
Σας ευχαριστώ, κύριε Επίτροπε.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And we're now going to have speakers on behalf of the different parties. On behalf of the EPP, for a minute and a half, Mr. Díaz de Mera. Go ahead, sir.
Gracias.
Thank you. Thank you, President. This question put to the Commission by Mr. Moraes is a very timely one. And the presentations we've heard on this topic have been very clear as well. Thank you. Now, these systems have been designed to control, facilitate and speed up passenger transit. And we're talking about passengers who normally come with their passport in hand, not people who come and wash up on a shore in Turkey or in Greece with nothing and only the clothes they stand in. This is the image that's been conjured up, but this is a confusion, and it's a confusion that stems from the presidency of the Council and the Commission as well. Currently, we calculate that in the Schengen area there are between 3 and 5 million people who have overstayed their leave to stay. And so we must put an end to these practices and procedures that are in clear violation of the Schengen area. I support the efforts of law enforcement services in each member state, but of course we need to clarify a few things. One is which authorities would access such data, and they should of course also provide sufficient guarantees for this procedure to be proportionate and limited to the legitimate ends. And of course, as the Presidency has said, this should not have an impact just on the European legislative acts, and that is very reassuring. But, President, just doing this in 1 minute and a half is just not enough after all the work that's been done. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Now, on behalf of the S&D for 3 minutes, Tanja FAJON.
Hvala lepa, predsedujoči.
Thank you very much indeed, President, and thank you for all those explanations. Why are we having this discussion today? Well, several things have happened over the last weeks and months that require exploration. We're talking about the introduction of smart external borders. We're talking about a project amounting to €800 million, and travellers should see their entry into the EU facilitated with automated border controls and so on. However, we all, including you, Mr. Schmit, are in an impossible situation. There are varying member state proposals, and we only hear, as by chance, which proposals are being circulated. Often, smart borders are linked to the migratory pressure on Europe, but we should not allow that. That does not serve the purpose of the Commission proposal. Of course, we are concerned about the lack of controls, and Slovenia too faces major pressure. Austria has announced a border fence with Slovenia, and the Schengen area is jeopardized by this. I'm not sure what will happen in regard to Slovenia now. Perhaps Slovenia will consider such measures along the Croatian border. So we do have major concerns. Border fences are being constructed within the Schengen area, and I don't think that can be reconciled with smart borders. However, the current situation should not be linked to smart borders. We have to give some very serious thought to this. In terms of smart borders, we need smart proposals, and I think that the Commission should take into account Parliament's concerns if it produces a new proposal. On behalf of the Socialists and Democrats, I'd like to emphasise the following. What is the aim of the proposal? Is it proportionate to the major costs? Are all aspects of the current systems, such as SIS2 and VIS, being fully exploited? We're also against personal data records being used for the law enforcement authorities. We're against putting in place such a system which is meant to be just a policing instrument and not benefit those who are meant to have things facilitated by it. We expect a positive approach, and interinstitutional cooperation should be transparent on this matter. Only in such a way will we come up with decent proposals. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, on behalf of the ECR, Mr. HALLA-AHO for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Schengen area is based on trust between the member states. However, although the same Schengen code applies to all member states, its implementation varies from one country to another. The external border does have weak points, and this should not be the case. Certain member states have their national entry-exit systems and registered travellers programmes, but their usefulness is limited as they do not communicate with each other. While free movement is one of the great achievements of European integration, it also offers many possibilities to criminals, terrorists, human traffickers, illegal immigrants and so on. These risks must be compensated by better management of the external border. The Smart Borders package does not mean Fortress Europe. It is a technological update that enables us to more effectively enforce the legislation and the rules that we already have. But the Smart Borders package is not only about security. It is also about facilitating smoother border crossing. The number of travellers to the European Union will grow dramatically. This will mean longer queues at border crossing points if nothing is done. It is also in the interest of the bona fide travellers that we bring our border management to the 21st century. If we do not control the external borders, we cannot have free movement of people within the European Union. This has become evident during the migration crisis, but it would be true also in a normal situation. The Smart Borders package is not linked to the current crisis on the external borders of the EU. Rather, its components are something that should have been in place before the abolition of internal border controls and the creation of the Schengen area. Thank you very much.
Σας ευχαριστώ για την Συμμαχία Φιλελευθέρων.
Thank you very much. And now, for 2 minutes, Madam MLINAR. Thank you, Chair. Well, today we're going to look at the issue of smart borders and also in the original plans. We're going to talk about modern technology, IT details, and discuss all the impact this has on travellers. Here we're talking about the management of the external borders, or the lack of management for the external borders. We might be moving towards stupid borders. Hungary, Slovenia, Germany, they all begin to think about it. In Germany, it's local politicians who are looking at it, and in Austria, it's the Home Office which actually believes seriously that we need to get some people on board with this. For a very long time, we have been looking at a situation which actually makes us think back to the period of the Iron Curtain and the period of the wall, because people once again are building walls in Europe. What's happening at the moment isn't helping us. The Schengen system is in great danger at the moment and is beginning to pose a threat now to the free movement of people. If we don't succeed, really, to find a way through this problem in order to help people legally to look for asylum from outside the EU borders, then more people are going to come here and they're going to try and get over these fences in order to put down a foothold on the EU territory. Therefore, every activity has got to be done in order to try and help the situation of the refugee camps in Turkey and Jordan in order to reduce the number of people who are travelling. We want to try and help people to stay closer to where they live, and that is what would really help us. In this direction, I'd also like to say that the amount of money put forward for smart borders, and that we need to use any unused finances in the current crisis in order to try and support those countries that are dealing with this on the ground. Thank you very much for that. Madam MLINAR, there is a blue cord for you, Madam von STORCH. Would you actually accept this? Madam von STORCH, you've got 30 seconds to pose your question.
Ja, Sie haben gerade die EU.
You just compared the EU external border with the former German Democratic Republic border. Are you aware that that border kept people trapped inside so they couldn't travel outside, whereas the protection of the EU external border isn't intended to prevent people from leaving the EU? Is it the same thing as a border which stops people from leaving?
So, Madam MLINAR, would you like to respond to that question? Well, fences and borders and walls, I think, aren't the right approach. It wasn't the case in the time of the DDR 30, 40 years ago, and it isn't the right approach now today in 2014, Madam STORCH. And so from that point of view, I'd say I do agree with you. Thank you very much. And now for the GUI group, Madame VERGIAT, 1 minute and a half.
As I said in June, this project is a symbol of the paradox of the EU. We're trying to make the EU more attractive and facilitate movement, but in doing so we're going to strengthen the external border further. So who's going to benefit, in what time lapse, and who will fall victim to this? The Council has just confirmed there are no doubts. First, migrants. We're incapable of opening up legal routes. I mean, whatever happens with receiving migrants and saving people at sea, what are we doing? We have to look at whether these provisions are timely. We have Eurosur, Eurodac, SIS, VIS. We have a plethora of systems. I mean, we're just piling on security measures instead of actually assessing the existing measures. What will be the results? And what about public finances? What will it cost? The expense is enormous. I mean, you know, the rapporteur has discovered a third option in just looking at all this proposed by the Commission. There's not much openness here. There's a lack of serious assessment, and here I'm talking about political assessment and not just purely technical assessment. It doesn't seem very serious, all of this. Just like with PNR, we're being said that this is urgent. We're being told that this is urgent. But, Mr. Commissioner, and we have priorities, yes, but we as a GUI NGL, we continue to oppose this project, all of it, out of hand, because it's not useful, we don't need it, and it's against the European values.
Thank you, Madame Vergier. There is a request to take the floor. Perhaps the best thing to do would be to give the floor to people who haven't yet spoken. So I'm going to give the floor now to Madam Keller. 2 minutes for the Green Group.
The member states have been thinking about a smart border system to facilitate faster travel. Smart borders, I'm sure, won't be so fast, even with the scrapping of the old stamping system. These so-called smart border systems are about being an extra block in Fortress Europe. Police are meant to get the fingerprints of third country nationals. All should go into the database, EU citizens or otherwise, and those fingerprints will be checked against scene of crime fingerprints, which is against fundamental rights. The European Court of Justice has just found that the mass storage of fingerprints is not consistent with EU law. Police access to fingerprints is discriminatory. Who is in there? Well, people who want to travel in who are not EU citizens, and I think you wouldn't expect EU citizens to be part of it, so why should they? The smart borders system is something that heads of state and government seem to have adopted recently as an attempt to deal with the migration crisis, but that's just a bad joke, because if smart borders are coming, then the member states will have to spend millions of euros on facial recognition devices and fingerprinting devices and a lot of other technology so that the system can work. And then, of course, that's going to benefit the surveillance industry, but I'm sure it's not going to benefit refugees. We heard only yesterday that EU money in the budget will be reduced for these areas of policy, and we've heard that 800 million is meant to be spent on smart borders, but we think this could be much better spent on the current problems we have, including the accommodation of refugees, and we shouldn't be spending money on expensive solutions which don't really fit with the problem. This is a more expensive and discriminatory solution to a problem in Europe.
Thank you very much. Madam Keller, we have a blue card from Mr. Mayer. But my list shows that Mr. Mayer is in any case going to take the floor in a few minutes. I won't give him the floor because he'll have the chance to talk a little bit later. So I'm going to be very tough today on the use of the blue card because we've got a very, very busy agenda here today. So I'm now going to give the floor for 1 minute for the FDD to Madam James. Madam James.
Thank you, sir. I'd be delighted if we saw some speeding up in this chamber. Having been here till nearly midnight last night, not fun, and quite frankly a waste of everybody's time and not least our taxpayers' money. When this proposal was first launched, there was a big question. Where was the specific just cause for it? Now, we heard earlier that it looks as though some attempts have been made to address that. Do I have confidence? No, I don't. What exactly does facilitating entry of frequent pre-vetted third-party nationals into the European Union mean? Absolute gobbledygook, doesn't take account of anything to do with identity theft, criminal intent, cyber attack, or, as has been mentioned, the mass migration that's now underway. Now, 3 weeks ago, I believe in the Brussels chamber, we heard that Schengen was effectively dead. I can't remember whether that was Mrs Merkel or Mr Hollande who said that, but if that's the case, the fundamental premise of this whole proposal, it's gone, it's evaporated, it's disappeared. Border controls need to return to the ownership and responsibility of member states. This proposal is now outdated, it's not fit for purpose, and it's certainly not value for money. Thank you, sir.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Για την ομάδα των Εθνών και της Ελευθερίας.
Thank you very much. Now the floor from Mr. Ferrand. Thank you, Chair, Mr. Commissioner, Minister. Well, you're living in an illusion. The war is on our borders. There is no intelligent border, because your intelligent borders don't even fulfill the first role that they have, which that of controlling and stopping people moving across it. It's something invited by the technocrats, intelligent borders. When you look at the whole issue of Schengen, you spend your time dismantling it. Since you set up the Smart Borders package, we've never seen such easily porous borders. We now see that our borders in Europe have become sieves through which people can move. In fact, the actual truth is it's dangerous. What you've managed is that every member state, listening to you, every member state is going to take back their sovereignty and their control of their borders, because today nobody has any trust in the European Union, and long live the free nations of Europe. Thank you very much. For 1.5 minutes, Mr. Becker.
Okay, John? Yeah. Sehr geehrter Herr Präsident.
President, Commissioner, Council, thank you very much for your statements. It's urgent for Europe to draw the appropriate lessons from recent events, and one of those is, of course, securing the European area. And if we know that the biggest number of illegal migrants in Europe are ones who have exceeded their permitted stay, then we have to bring in the necessary checks built on 2 pillars. That's why I fully support the Smart Borders package, and so does the EPP. I believe maintaining data protection obviously has to be a key component of this project. As to the feared cost increases, it should be said that security is a question of the responsibility to citizens of politicians, and that justifies the spending. And of course, linking it with other tasks such as the prosecution of the most serious crimes and terrorism makes sense and should be supported. I therefore believe it is necessary for this Smart Border package to be brought to the implementation phase as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now for 1 minute, López Aguilar.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, the delay and the changes in the objectives of this smart package border, which you've expressed in this context of a crisis, well, it's very worrying, because this is the context not of a euro crisis, but a crisis of trust in the EU and a migrant crisis, because this tool which was supposed to facilitate border crossing is now being presented to us as a security measure, making borders more rigid, less flexible. And this is also something that's going to affect data retention. And of course, we've heard the European Court of Justice issue its opinion, and it has, of course, rejected the adequacy of the Safe Harbor Agreement. So, what guarantees do we have now? Can we validate this system of retaining data? Will it be safe enough? I mean, we're going to have more fingerprinting and less finger pointing in the mean, but I mean, what we need is more certainty about the borders.
Thank you very much.
Ja, Herr Präsident, wir reden heute über den
Now we're talking about the EU smart borders, intelligent borders, personal data and fingerprints for secret services. But the problem really is that smart borders are only working for legal travellers. The real problem are illegal travellers. When we look at data retention, the external borders of the EU are actually very open. There's no real check, there's no real controls. Think of the hundreds and thousands of people who are illegally crossing the borders. If we don't actually solve this, then all the money we're spending is just a waste of money. We have to try and have smart borders, but what we've got to do is actually simpler, stupid borders, if you like. That's what we need, because these are basic borders and also proper thresholds. Thank you very much. And now Mr. CORRAO for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Ladies and gentlemen, this smart borders provision, I think, is indicative of the confusion there is in the EU when it comes to management of borders and instruments. This instrument was designed to facilitate life, to make it easier to conduct border checks so that people could travel more quickly and we could modernize things. But now, because of the tension and ongoing discussions about refugees and these major migratory flows, this instrument, which was meant to serve one purpose, has been twisted into another sort of instrument which is meant to raise a wall which member states seem increasingly see fit to build. But the original aim was to reduce costs. It's absurd to think of spending 800 million on something which probably could be done at 1/10 of the cost, and with an objective which should be the original one. We shouldn't try and use it to build up a wall.
Έχετε μια μπλε κάρτα από την κυρία Μουσολίνη.
There is a blue card from Madam Mussolini. Go ahead.
Volevo chiedere al
I wanted to ask the colleague if it is in fact the case that dealing with the terrible situation for security to actually reactivate these old-fashioned stamped passports. And if you're not going to move towards innovation, well, how, if you're not going to do it, how are you going to have smart borders at all?
Yes, I shall answer the colleague, Mrs. Mussolini. Obviously, the objective was to modernize, to speed up the procedures. Clearly, in 2015, we don't want to waste time in extraordinarily long airport queues doing everything manually. We should modernize and use the technology to do it quickly. The problem of this package, I would repeat, is that it costs an exorbitant sum and it's shifted objectives, closing borders and using data for unclear purposes, and therefore it conflicts with fundamental rights as well. That's the point.
Το λόγο έχει για 1 λεπτό ο κύριος Μάγερ.
Mr. Meyer, 1 minute. Thank you very much, President. Europe's border being better controlled. I'm not sure if this is a serious conversation, because we're living in a situation today in which the border traffic isn't being controlled at all. At the moment in time, I think it's even cynical to talk about smart borders, because what we actually need are tough borders. And when we look at the situation in Austria, particularly in the situation in South Austria, in Steiermark and Spielfeld, where I was last Sunday, where you can see that every day there are thousands of refugees who break through. This is not talking about legal border traffic. They're simply not being registered. The situation on the ground for people who live there is unbearable. And it's completely out of control from the point of view of the Austrian federal government. They actually are no longer capable of protecting their own territory. Some people, actually look and point at the federal ministry and say that they are becoming people smugglers. And here we're talking about smart borders in this situation. And I don't think if this is not going to be, all have got to be under no illusions as regards the real situation here. Thank you very much. And now is Mr. Coelho for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Minister, Commissioner. these clarifications are very timely because we see several bands in this debate. We, of course, see that this is all about excellent intentions of wanting to try to catch people who overstay in their visa, but we see an expansion of the scope now. Mr. Díaz de Mera and Madam Tanja FAJON have already highlighted this delusion. This is not related to the current migratory pressure we're under. There's an increasing number of people that are using the borders just for populist rhetoric. But that wasn't what all of this was about. Now, Commissioner, you've talked about the budget and controlling it, and we have to look at what this will cost for the EU and also the cost to national budget in order for us to decide whether this is cost effective. I want to make this very clear, and I want that the Commission also makes sure that fundamental rights are guaranteed throughout this legislative exercise, and to make sure that this is all proportionate. And we all want to protect Schengen and freedom of movement, but there is no movement without safety and security. And we also know, however, that security can drown freedom.
Anna Madam Chinnicici for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. 7 years have passed since the idea of smart borders got off the ground, but the geopolitical situation has substantially changed. We cannot deny that in the last few months our borders have been hit by unprecedented migratory flows, which requires smarter management of borders, including new technology at the external borders and around the Schengen area, which involves the exchange of information. There can be new features to deal with the problem of no overstayers. The smart border package, with its substantial costs, however, cannot be seen as the only approach to such a sensitive issue in terms of the legal and social implications deriving from it. Because of the sensitivity and because of the rulings on data retention, we need very careful maintenance of storage of sensitive data and biometric data in line with the Charter of Fundamental Rights. Thank you very much.
Thank
you very much. Mr. Trebesius, 1 minute. Yes, Mr. Commissioner, the smart border concept should be looking at, should be supporting the legal entry and exit into the EU. But when we look at the current system, the uncontrolled migration, well, neither we won't be able to use the smart border system to prevent illegal migration. The Commission already admits that it hasn't been thought through and that it isn't fit for purpose when it comes to the issue of dealing with illegal immigration, and that there need to be more staff to do that. Is there in fact any real basis for setting in this system? From my point of view, that the most important thing is to understand that we're looking at people who are coming into the EU who aren't properly documented and who are overstaying the period that they're allowed to be here. When you look at migrants with a biometric system, it's got to be put into the system. It's very important that they're registered in the system against the people who are trying to avoid this. We've got to have sanctions against them. It's absolutely obvious that the Schengen system doesn't work because, quite simply, too many people are coming in from the external borders in a non-regulated manner. Thank you very much. Mr. Tchaikovsky for 1 minute.
Mr. Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, recently in Eurostat statistics I have found an interesting piece of information. The largest entry point for illegal migrants into Europe is not the Balkan route, but international airports. Given the current state of information about the incredible numbers of refugees in the Mediterranean and on the borders of Hungary, Croatia or Slovenia, I was very surprised by this information. Nevertheless, this information is true, and it is a direct consequence of the fact that the EU has no functioning single system of entry-exit registration. And there is not even a registration of a duration of stay of an individual. These illegal migrants are the result of nothing else than our own incapability to monitor who moves through our territory. Therefore, the Smart Borders package is crucial for me, and any lengthy revision or prolonging the negotiations will only make the situation worse.
Thank you very much indeed. And your time has, the timing as well. Mrs. Gabriel has the floor. Thank you, Mr. President. Commissioner, you said that the Union has to have a more rapid, effective and modern management of its borders while carrying out verification checks. 3 members already have their own entry and exit system. There is no systematic and structured cooperation within the Union. So the status quo is no longer acceptable. We have to move on. I'd like to stress 4 points. Firstly, the introduction of a smart borders system will allow us to have effective exchange of data, not only between the various different national authorities, but also with Europol or Interpol in order to detect, for example, the use of stolen passports, thanks to automatic and automated consultation of their files. We need to change the working method by making cooperation the rule rather than the exception. Secondly, we have to tap the full potential of this system by authorizing access for the forces of law and order. SIS and VIS are already accessible to the national authorities and Europol. So what I'm asking is, why not smart borders? Thirdly, this mechanism should be adapted to all types of borders, land, sea and air. We've seen that we cannot give priority to the protection of certain types of borders to the deficit of others. The credibility of the European Union internationally depends on its ability to ensure security within its territory. So yes to nobility, but also yes to security. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Gabriel. There is a blue card for you from Mr. Everidge. Will you accept it? Mr. Everidge.
Děkuji, takže...
Thank you for accepting the question. My question is simple. Why must there be EU border control? The EU is not a country. Why can border control not be done by sovereign, independent nation states who might be members of the EU, but they have their own borders to control? The EU is not a country, so I'm really confused by this whole concept of why something that is not a country should look to control borders that don't exist.
Thank you. Mrs. Gabriel, you've got 30 seconds to explain and to respond to Mr. Everidge. Thank you for that question.
Děkuji za otázku. Já si myslím,
Mr. Everidge should draw the main conclusion of what's been happening for months, and that is that if the Union had worked together with joint action, we would have been able to face up to the current crisis, and we would have better been able to manage the situation. We've now seen the results of what happens if member states manage the crisis alone. So I would go for the European Union approach, all of us together.
Gabriel.
Thank you, Mrs. Gabriel. That completes the list of speakers, and we now move on to Catch the Eye. There are 3 people who've asked for the floor. I will accept all 3 of them. For 1 minute, Mrs. Flašíková Beňová has the floor to begin with.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne, pán predsedajúci. Kolegovia, inteligentné hranice sú nesmierne dôležitou problematikou práve v kontexte udalostí posledných mesiacov. A tak ako v iných oblastiach súvisiacich s riešením imigračnej a utečeneckej krízy sa opäť ukazuje,
there's a slight technical problem, so I would ask you please, there was no interpretation.
We had a problem with the English translation, so we can start again.
Můžete tedy začít znovu.
Once we've been assured that we do have interpretation, which apparently we do have, so you have 1 minute from the beginning once again.
Pekne, pán predseda, vážený pán komisár, kolegyne a kolegovia, dúfam, že teraz už bude tlmočenie v poriadku. Chcela by som len zdôrazniť.
Colleagues, I hope it's working. Thank you very much indeed. I would like to simply stress the fact that smart borders are of incredible importance, particularly within the context of what we've seen happening over recent months. In other areas as well, common asylum policy, other joint solutions we will have to find at European Union level. Within that overall context, the smart borders are something which have to be solved by the European Union. I agree with what other speakers have already said very clearly. I think that the smart borders are a good solution to solving many of these problems. And I think that we really need to implement all of this as quickly as possible to ensure that we can turn around to our people after today's meeting and say that we've done more to increase their security. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Marias, for 1 minute. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. President. Commissioner, the strategy on smart borders, when it first began, had a different social and geopolitical context. Now with these mass refugee flows, I would say that the situation has become much more complicated. What we have to clarify first and foremost is that the responsibility for protection of the borders lies exclusively in the hands of member states. That has to be made absolutely crystal clear, because from other areas, Mrs. Merkel for example, there's apparently this approach to jointly manage the borders in the Mediterranean. That has to be clarified. Now this new system has to be fully rolled out, and in April 2014 there was a ruling on this from the Court of Justice, that there should be proportionality and that an environment should be provided in order to ensure that fundamental rights are respected. Only on that basis will the smart borders policy be able to work correctly. Thank you. I'd like to now conclude the Catch the Eye process with Mr. Jakovčić for 1 minute.
Hvala lijepo, gospodine predsjedavajući.
Hvala vam. Thank you.
Děkuji. Ale já nemám
orders. No one can say for sure that people who have not been registered did not enter the European Union. We don't know who entered. We have to be honest and say that openly. Citizens who were fleeing war managed to enter the territory of the European Union in various ways. We do need borders, but we don't need razor fence or walls. Razor fences and walls are not smart borders. This is why I support your intention. Together with all member states, we need to act, and we need to solve the problems on our external borders. Only in this way we will be able to guarantee to the European Union citizens the security that they today lack, unfortunately.
Thank you very much indeed. And now on behalf of the Commission, Mr. Avramopoulos. Thank you very much indeed once again, Mr. President.
Honourable members of the Parliament, thank you very much for this really fruitful exchange of views. This debate we had today confirms the vital importance, I would say, of the input of the Parliament into our joint efforts to create a smart border system that meets its objectives and that offers genuine value for money. Since we all know that in the years to come the travellers' flow will continue to increase, will continue to grow, we need a better and a smarter border management system. There's no doubt about it. If we do nothing, we will either have to face much longer queues at the borders, or we'll have to employ more border guards in the near future, and neither of these options seems acceptable or feasible. I noticed that many of you made reference to Schengen. I avail myself of this opportunity to tell you and repeat, we will not allow to isolated, one-sided actions taken under the state of fear to put in question the greatest achievement of Europe during our times. Dear Mrs. Vergiat, this Commission, as I had committed during the hearing 1 year ago, took the time to carefully evaluate the Smart Borders proposal, and we shall come back with a new proposal in order to modify proposals based on a new impact assessment. I don't therefore agree that we are acting under pressure nor urgency. On the contrary, I would say, we took into account your considerations that will be reflected in the modified proposal. The Commission is looking forward to continue working closely with the Parliament in this important file and really counts on your support and cooperation to find the right balance. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. On behalf of the Council, Mr. Schmit.
Well, I support what the Commissioner has said. First of all, the present situation is an entirely exceptional situation, so you shouldn't be drawing the wrong conclusions from the present situation. And secondly, I believe that what the Commissioner said about Schengen is very important. We all know that Schengen needs a system that works better at the external frontiers, external borders. That's why proposals are going to be coming forward. We need an effective system that is more efficient as well in combating phenomena like terrorism and organised crime. And we should be aware that the 21st century is going to be the century of mobility, of movement. There'll be people moving from one country to another. And so there's also a need for an efficient system which allows mobility, enhances mobility, but also proposes measures so that we can fight against organised crime or other problems related to irregular migration, irregular movement.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Schmit. That concludes the debate, and the next item on today's agenda is Mrs. Gall's report, the EU Agency for Law Enforcement Training. For 4 minutes, I will give the floor to the rapporteur, Mrs. Gall.
Köszönöm, elnök úr. Biztos úr, kedves kollégák.
Thank you. I would like to express my joy and happiness about the fact that the European Parliament will be voting on the new sample regulation tomorrow. I need to say thank you for all the shadow reporters, especially Madam Flašíková-Beňová, whose cooperation and support has been extremely important during the negotiations. I also appreciate the work performed by the Latvian presidency, especially Madam Indra Bula, who has been proactive and constructive in the way she supported the trialogue negotiations. We all know that there have been a lot of challenges that the internal security of the European Union needed to face recently, and we can expect the same to go on in the future. So we need law enforcement agencies that fight crime, who are able to respond to these challenges at the European Union level. We're talking about cross-border crime, internet crime, terrorism. We need law enforcement agents who are able to handle today's migration crisis with full, complete professionalism. So CEPOL can actually be a tool to improve the culture of law enforcement, to improve cooperation and trust between the member states, and to improve cross-border cooperation. It can help us create a law enforcement culture in Europe that ensures fundamental rights are being respected, as well as our safety. is being guaranteed. We believe here in Parliament that a modernized, efficient and appropriately staffed CEPOL agency is absolutely vital. During the cooperation negotiations with our co-legislators, we have been focusing on CEPOL and laying down the foundations for CEPOL, that the cooperation between the national police academies should go on and improve. As soon as it is possible, CEPOL must have the mandate, the powers, the tasks and the responsibilities and accountability that ensure it can work efficiently. We believe that by doing so, by using this new regulation, we have been able to create the conditions for CEPOL becoming an agent in creating a new law enforcement culture in Europe. Now, this new regulation modernizes the legal basis of CEPOL, harmonizes it with amendments to the treaties, and also ensures that some of the principles of police cooperation are actually implemented. These should include a survey of what trainings we need, what common curricula we need, what mechanisms of sharing positive examples we need, and what minimum knowledge must be provided by each institution that trains law enforcement agents, and must be able to train people and provide trainers. Over the past years, CEPOL has been considered as a network, but a network does not have legal personality and is not accountable at all. That's why